I listened for each of your concrete or actionable comments as to what might be done. I picked up, Brad, from you the idea of somehow getting to Hollywood, and you, Amy, I don't know if it was actually a suggestion, but it seemed like if the elite regain their moral nerve, that might make a difference. And Jonathan, you suggested that gay marriage will make a difference. And this raised two questions for me. The first would be, so of the three suggestions, there seemed to be one that's actually being implemented in some jurisdictions, is how long will we have to wait before gay marriage in those certain jurisdictions starts to manifest an improvement in the marriage rate or the delay of the sexual debut or whatever it is that we need to see happen to make the improvements to marriage as an institution that we're looking for in society. And the second question is a broader question, is some of these suggestions, I'm wondering if historically there were other things that drove a delay in sexual debut or an increase in the incidence of marriage or reduction in the average age of marriage, and if we might learn something from those, and if you could maybe give us an example or two of this being done some other point in history in some other country or even our own where it was successful.
Well, my response is easy, which is how long will you have to wait for gay marriage to save straight marriage? Forever. I'm afraid we can't do it. You guys have messed up straight marriage. You guys, yeah, right, the deal's off. You guys are going to have to fix it. Gay marriage is going to be, I think, it's more positive than negative, but I think the vectors are pretty small compared to these other factors we're talking about are far more important. I think the effect of not having gay marriage, this is a little hard to express, but the effect of having it is mostly that it avoids a bad thing, which is that if you don't have gay marriage, you redefine marriage not as between a man and a man, but as a form of discrimination, right? So you're going to tarnish it in the eyes of an entire generation going forward and make it much harder to defend as a norm. So I think there is a significant downside of not having it, but I don't think having it is really going to save anyone's marriage in this room. That's not the reason to do it.
Yeah, on gay marriage, I mean, I think the whole conversation about gay marriage and why we should have gay marriage is, I would sort of separate and say the following, that gay marriage is a uniquely elite preoccupation. I think if you go out there to sort of the heartland and talk to, the vast run of people, doesn't have as much salience as it does for, once again, the people that we talk to. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not an important issue or that we shouldn't have it. It just means that I don't really think it's going to make that much difference to the kind of people whose families are falling apart presently. I mean, that would be my view of it. Once again, it's the sort of conspiracy, the New York Times conspiracy theory that I'm kind of putting forward here.
I wish the New York Times still had that kind of power.
Yeah, really. I mean, they just
then they wouldn't be.
Their power is very selective.
Yeah, they wouldn't be laying off as many journalists like me. But there was a second part of your question that was not about gay marriage, which is, I think, about are there successful examples of renorming?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can obviously look at look at smoking. Obviously, we can look at public campaigns of one sort or another taking place. On drunk driving is another great example where there has been a kind of shift.
Eating habits might be next.
Eating habits could be next. I mean, but we have to get the elites on board with this kind of agenda to affect a positive difference with this kind of strategy. But I think also we often overlook in this kind of circle the importance of economics, and you know more about that than I do, but I think we have to figure out ways to, it's not just about income, it's also about stability. People need to have a sense that they have, some economic stability, both presently and in the future, that they can kind of build a marriage, build a family around. And that is less and less the case for many working class and poor Americans. And until we can kind of, I think, shore up the foundations of American economic life to foster that kind of stability, we're not going to really turn a corner either. So I think it's about both addressing the cultural, the legal, and the economic foundations of marriage in ways that will be helpful.
We're coming to the end, I think. Do we have, well, we've got a couple of minutes, and I don't see anyone here in the line, which suggests to me that you guys are all about ready to call it a day. But I'd like to...
Can I make one comment about Sweden?
Yeah, I was going to ask for a final comment.
Right, Sweden. I did want to go back to this sort of red herring of what's happening in Sweden. Cohabitation in Scandinavia is a much more stable institution than in the United States. Now, of course, that just begs the question of why that's the case. even though you're right, the current data shows that there's a volatility there and that cohabiting relationships are becoming less stable in Scandinavia. I think that bourgeois norms of conduct in Scandinavia, places like Scandinavia and Holland, are just so much stronger and more uniform. That's a cultural phenomenon than they are here. I'll just tell a little story. I had a Swedish au pair a few years ago for my kids, and we had to take her to get a driver's license, and she needed to give information about her parents, where they married. She said, well, actually, they're not married. Well, they'd been together for 40 years. They had 2 kids. They were in all respects just the most solid kind of middle-class conventional couple you could imagine, but they weren't married. So in Scandinavia, it really is all but piece of paper. Now, would that it would be that way here? Well, it isn't.
I think homogeneity has something to do with it. It is easier to transmit a cultural message to everyone if almost everyone looks like you and sounds like you and speaks the same language. America, of course, has been a heterogeneous society forever, which makes it a challenge, and it's becoming a more bifurcated society. It's not just marriage, it's on a lot of fronts. And it's hard to talk in a unified way about unified norms to a split society. It's just going to be harder. Before we adjourn, do either of the other two of you have anything you'd like to mention?
I guess I would just sort of leave you with this one simple idea, and that is that this report, one of the new things that I think it brings into our conversation is that cohabitation and kids don't mix. That's one of the key new conclusions that this report brings into our larger public conversation about marriage and family life in this country.
I am confident, guys, that I'm sorry, I forgot any. You don't have to say anything.
No, that's okay. But just one, there's a lot that's in here also, and one is that there's a lot of research more recently looking at the other end of the life course and how divorced and single adults are confronting aging and death and dying issues. And it's something that a colleague and I are starting to get into as a next project. So I guess what I'd like to say is, while many of us focus a lot on the impact of all this on children and young people, there's also what some are calling kind of the silver tsunami, the idea of the baby boomers who are now hitting Medicare eligible and who also ushered in, declining marriage culture and distrust of institutions, and now they're becoming more fragile. And how's that all going to play out? So that's another element that starts to get examined in this report as well.
I cannot recommend the report too strongly. The themes you heard here today are the coming debate over the next 10 years in embryo. Family breakdown in the black middle class, cohabitation as a threat to kids. This is really where the conversation is going to be going. Thank you all very much for coming tonight.
Stay, have a drink. Thank you so much. Thank you.